You are once again stepping into the world of survival horror. Good luck. So I just got done with Resident Evil Requiem on Sunday just gone, and I took a few days to process everything. I did actually try and make a 2 hour and 57 minute video on it, and then some things happened. It just wasn't meant to be. Basically, some stuff went wrong, and I thought, something's trying to tell me, make a short form video on this. So this is essentially my official review of the game, but I want to talk about story. There's so many spoilers and things like that I don't want to spoil in this video. We will go over all that stuff in a separate video at some point down the line. I think I need to play it a second time for me to sort of be able to talk about that properly and go in depth. For now, this is a short form review of the game, and I think that the story, starting with the story, we'll just get that out of the way because I don't want to spoil anything. I think the story impressed me. I was happy with it overall. I would say that some things, I guess it retcons, but they're only slight retcons, and it kind of makes sense when you get to see the story play out and sort of how it deals with the remake timeline, not the OG timeline, but the remake timeline. It kind of slots in there. It does pull from games like Resident Evil 5, Resident Evil 6, pretty much because this is the 30th anniversary of Resident Evil. This game is like one massive love letter, not only to us fans but also to the team at Capcom that have grown up with this series and worked on this series and, you know, created some absolute bangers, you know, within the series. So it's great. It's a love letter of everything Resident Evil, and it just encapsulates the 30 years, you know, of this series. I genuinely like the story. I would give the story like a high 7. It would be like a 7.7 out of 10 just for the story alone. And I think that it was a massive improvement over Villages and also over RE7's. In Resident Evil 7's defense, though, it was a more scaled back, grounded plot, you know, within the universe of Resident Evil. That's kind of how I looked at it, and I think that's what was intended, you know, by Nakanishi when he created that. Obviously, my thoughts on Village's story, everybody knows if you've watched my previous videos, I wasn't the biggest fan. I'm still not the biggest fan of it. I think, though, it handles bringing Hammer House horror type monsters into the Resident Evil series quite well. It sounds weird for me to say that, but being a fan of the old school type of Hammer horror, you know, monsters like vampires and werewolves and, you know, the creature of the Black Lagoon, things like that. Yeah, it's awesome. Like, I think that it handled that very well. It's just, it didn't need to be in a Resident Evil game. That's the points I've been trying to make for a long time. I think that the story massively jumped the shark, but when it comes to Resident Evil Requiem's story, I think that it gets it back on track. If you want to count this as an end cap to a trilogy, you know, so it's the end to an already established trilogy of games, I would say it's RE2, RE3 Remake, RE4 Remake, and then Resident Evil Requiem. So that completes the saga. Village and 7 do play small little roles within this game's story, but it's mostly, I would say, RE2 Remake, 3 Remake, and then also 4 Remake, and then this game. And it's a culmination of those kind of plot threads and those stories, and also Leon as a character as well. That's pretty much all I can say about the story without ruining it. I just think that fans, long-time fans as well, if you go into it with the right mindset, I think you'll be happy. It pretty much does what Metal Gear Solid 4 did for that series, for the Resident Evil series, plot-wise. It keeps you guessing. There's loads of bait and switches, loads of plot twists, tying up loose ends. At the same time, it opens up doors to new plot threads, you know, for forthcoming kind of plots and stories. The one thing I will say is it does finish the Umbrella arc. 100% it does finish the Umbrella arc. It doesn't really finish Leon's arc, I will say that. And that's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to say any more other than that. So it just depends. There are 2 endings to this game, so I'm going to put that out there. So it's not like I've technically ruined anything. And the last thing I will say about the story is that it had me pointing my finger at the TV screen, I would say at 11 o'clock at night, shouting at my TV, because there were certain things that happened in the story that pretty much blew my mind. And shocked and surprised me. I'm not even making this up. Like, I was genuinely surprised and shocked. And I thought, you know, if this is the way that Capcom are moving forward in terms of storytelling, then I'm all for this. This is great. So yeah, there is so much in this story. There's too much. That's why originally I made a 2 hour and 57 minute video covering it. And even then, there was things that I didn't want to spoil in that video. But I thought, well, you know, I can make a separate one and we can go over all that stuff. So story wise, it's a 7.7 out of 10. It was fucking sick. And I am glad to report that those leaks weren't true. And also, it goes to show how wrong Dust Golem is most of the time. Not to bleat on about him anymore, but yeah, he got a lot wrong. There was a lot that he didn't leak. There was things in this game and in its plot that he would have leaked, you know, till Kingdom Come, and he didn't do that because he didn't have that information. So I just want to point out that please go into this game, you know, not reading anything online. There was only one tiny thing that got spoiled for me. To do with the ending, and that's it, but I kind of knew that anyway. I went into this game pretty much blind, and yeah, I was shocked with the revelations and just the way the plot moved forward. It was great. There's moments between Gideon and Leon that had me actually laughing, you know, at it, and yeah, and I think Gideon was a really good antagonist, maybe the best since Albert Wesker. So he was awesome. But yeah, overall plot was fantastic, and had me guessing and brought a bit of a mystery back to the plot of Resident Evil like games. I think the first one's the only game where I was kind of scratching my head going, what's going on, you know? And this kind of, I don't know, it had a similar kind of plot where it just kept me guessing, and it was like a little detective story. You're in for a thrill ride, definitely. So yeah, that's about as much as I can say about the plot. We want to talk about the actual game, but there's certain parts in the game that I can't talk about because it spoils a lot. So we'll just talk about gameplay. Gameplay, obviously you guys know, seeing the trailers and the build up to Requiem, you know that it was kind of a mix of RE7 stealth, and also sort of stealthily trying to take out enemies, and then a bit of action thrown in with Leon's parts. And during your time in the chronic care facility, the Rhodes Hill chronic care facility, that's pretty much the basis for Grace's gameplay sections and also Leon's segments. Now, in the beginning of the game, Leon's segments are very, very short. I will say that. It's basically giving you Grace, you know, underpowered, constantly scared, and then letting you go to town on any zombies and sort of boss type enemies that Grace, you know, had to avoid. Going to town with Leon, and just all that pent up frustration and aggression and anxiety just releasing when you play as Leon Kennedy. How does the game control? It's very fluid to control. I didn't have any issues. You can actually have a quick snap sort of aim, which is called a soft lock. That's it, soft lock. You can have that, much like Max Payne 3 and any kind of over-the-shoulder third-person shooters allow you to have, and you can have it either soft or hard or pause. But yeah, it does make, I recommend having that turned on to maybe soft lock, because it does make things a lot easier. You know, you can just sort of soft lock onto a target and headshot them. But the zombies also are very, very spongy, much like the Remaker 2 and the villagers in the Remaker 4. So, and also, I'd say the molded you could actually headshot them once you got the rifle. But you can kind of do that in this with a rifle in this. So, you know, just have the lock on to soft. It's not that bad. You can just, at least if you're in a pinch, headshot a zombie or whatever enemy you're facing off against, and it gives you time to stun them and push them over, and then you can just, you know, shoot them while they're down. But yeah, it was well optimized. I will say that it was well optimized. Some people have complained about the sway and it doesn't feel that tight to control. I didn't really feel that during my playthrough. I thought it was one of the tighter sort of over-the-shoulder third-person games that I've played in a long time. I will say that. So yeah, I had no issues with it. I can see why some people think it's a little bit not really tanky. It's a little bit tanky, which you expect. It's a Resident Evil game. It's a survival horror game, for the most part. You know, but I think some people had issues with like the lock-on and stuff, and just the aiming doesn't feel as smooth. But after you've played a game like Evil Within, the first one, it's godly. It's god tier compared to that. So yeah, I don't really understand that complaint. I think they maybe need to play some survival horror games, you know, like Alone in the Dark, the reboot, where the controls are fucking horrible, and then you'll come back to Requiem and praise it for being as tight, you know, as it is. But I never had no problems. I'll just say that I never had no problems. So that's just on a personal. Now, Grace only gets a handgun These injector things, it's much like in Blade, you know, in that film where he injected the vampires with his whatever serum and they exploded. So she gets a similar thing in this, and that leads to you being able to sneak up to them and stealthily take them out with an injector and they explode. We've seen this in the trailers, everybody knows about this. And then she gets like one handgun. Later on she gets a Molotov. Well, she gets her hands on some Molotov cocktails, as well as also a jar of acid, or jars of acid. I can't really say much about the jars of acid because it would spoil things for the late game. All I'll say is they're very effective and were much needed during those particular parts of the game. And then she gets her hands on the Requiem as well, which is an extremely powerful weapon, a very powerful Magnum. It kind of takes me back to Resident Evil Remake, where you get your hands on the Magnum and it's super powerful. So the Requiem is like that on steroids, you know, times 10, but you only get a limited supply of ammo. And Grace has to use this little machine that she acquires where you can collect blood. You've probably seen this in gameplay trailers. You collect blood and then you can craft things like health and ammo and these injectors as well to sort of one-shot the zombies to kill them instantly. That can lead to you kind of upgrading it and it being able to craft Requiem ammo, so that's where most of the Requiem ammo comes from. But then later on you'll be able to stumble across sort of, you know, chests and things like that contain some of the ammo, and you can pick up some of the ammo later on. At the beginning of the game though, you're pretty much stuck with maybe 2 bullets each time, you know, throughout the length of the chronic care facility segment, and so you're not able to just go around and just one shot like zombies and some of the low level bosses. You can't just one shot them. You have to be very sparing with the ammo and with that gun and what enemies you use it on. Now this might be a little bit of a spoiler. It's not, you know, to me it's not really a big one. Grace doesn't really get, other than the Requiem, any other sort of guns. She just has a handgun. I think she gets like a slightly different handgun later on, and she does lose the Requiem halfway through the game, and she doesn't get it again. Instead, she gets her hands on some Molotov cocktails and, like I said, those jars of acid, which are extremely powerful and very potent. So yeah, if that's a bit disappointing, you know, you've got to understand that the way her gameplay scenarios play out, even later in the game, it would be a bit weird and silly to have a powerful weapon like the Requiem, or like a grenade launcher, or, you know, this and that. So yeah, I was cool with it. I was fine with that. Leon, however, he gets his hands on all types of, you know, weapons. Like, he's got a huge arsenal. But we're not getting an Ethan from Resident Evil 7 situation where, as the game progresses, his arsenal gets bigger and better. With Grace's segments, it's all about sneaking around, stealthily killing enemies, and if push comes to shove, you've got to use a handgun to stun an enemy or something like that, or a Molotov cocktail to burn them, set them on fire. Which, by the way, the fire effects in this game looked amazing. Like, they look really good. Most of the particle effects in this game were top notch, top tier. But yeah, so that's pretty much how Grace plays. When it comes to Leon, well, we all know, like, Leon is an absolute badass. He is John Wicking zombies left and right. You know, that part in the beginning where he's in the streets where Renwood Hotel is situated, like, he's just taking out zombies left and right and trying to rescue Grace from Gideon, who's like kidnapped her, and he's taken her to the chronic care facility, his chronic care facility. So yeah, that part was just, what an amazing opening to any game that I've played. It is so good. A lot of people saying, oh, I get Resident Evil 6 vibes. You know, yeah, I could see that. I could see maybe they borrowed a little bit from Resident Evil 6 to do with that particular part, but it's done so much better. Like, this game borrows heavily from the whole universe of Resident Evil. Let's just say that, from the CG films to some of the live action films to obviously the games. It's yeah, it's an incredible moment, and I absolutely loved it. I thought, what a great sort of opening. Like, Grace's part is really cool, and then Leon's is just balls to the wall, like jumping over cars, you know, headshotting zombies. They're biting the civilians. You're trying to distinguish you know, the civilians from the zombies. It's an amazing opening to this game. Like, it's amazing, I will say that. And you're just in this random town that's a few miles away from Raccoon City, or a fair few miles away from Raccoon City, but it's on that same kind of path on the map that then eventually leads to Raccoon City, I will say that, and also leads to the Chronic Care Centre. I'm not sure if this was Rhodes Hill. Like I said, I've got to play this game a second time. I've kind of forgotten maybe if it was Rhodes Hill or not. I'm pretty sure that Rhodes Hill Chronic Care Centre's further away from this town, but maybe it is Rhodes Hill. Either way, the set piece is amazing, and it kind of sets up the later set pieces that happen in the game. I will say that without spoiling anything. This is like the Uncharted or the God of War 2018 of the Resident Evil series. You know, it has some incredible set pieces, some jaw-dropping. Wow, I can't believe they actually like did that sort of set pieces. They're really, really awesome. I love them. And it makes up quite a large bulk of the late game, I will say that. But it's done so well. I had no issues or problems with it. And there's even like some explanation as to a certain bioweapon that was featured in Resident Evil Vendetta. And it kind of explains later on how said bioweapon is able to run as fast as it can in that film. And then in this game's plot and this set piece, it kind of explains, you know, as to why this bioweapon is able to basically, let's just say, keep up with Leon while he's riding a motorcycle. Let's just say that without just going deep into spoilers. I will say that. So that particular set piece was sick as well. I really enjoyed that. But the moment-to-moment Leon gameplay is pretty much what you've seen in the trailers. You know, he is more than capable of dispatching most bioweapons. He gets his hands on the most amount of weaponry. Guns, various guns, grenades. You know, his hatchet, which is awesome. He can just dispatch zombies with the hatchet. You can do a really charged up hit, or you can just slice at them. I will say the animation when he's just slicing them up and stuff, it is a bit goofy looking, definitely, but it just adds to that Resident Evil charm. But yeah, the hatchet was amazing. It can still deflect, you know, chainsaws, and if a zombie's got his hands on an iron pipe or something, it can deflect that while it tries to hit you. It also is his go-to when stealthily killing like zombies or other enemies. That's his weapon of choice, to take them out and dispatch them like quickly and quietly. And I feel like the Capcom team that handled this game, as well as Nakanishi, have been playing Doom Eternal, because there's some glory kills in this as well. You've seen it during the trailers. But yeah, sometimes you'll stick your shotgun in a zombie's mouth and blow its head clean off, and that shit was awesome. It actually got me out of some tight scrapes, definitely. But his whole moveset is pretty much Resident Evil 4 remake, but just times 10. He moves and controls perfectly. I will say one thing though, if you let enemies swarm you, especially kind of the middle part of the game, there's a part that sort of like lasts for about 4 hours, and if you get cornered by like loads of enemies, it can get a bit frustrating. There's some parts during that middle segment of the game that got annoying. I will say that without spoiling too much. Then again, I kind of looked at myself as not playing it the best way I could have. So it's down to me in some ways as to how I got myself in those situations. It was a learning process that made me realise the next time I play the game, I'm going to play it this way. I'm going to go into the situation like this. And if I did die, then when I went back to take on that part of the game again, I went into it with a different mindset. So that's great. I love games that, you know, that do that. And kind of have you learning as you go. And also it has checkpoint saves, you know, during Leon's part, so it's not, you know, it's not like a big deal. You're not getting put back to the last save point that was like an hour ago. It does have checkpoint saves, and it uses these checkpoint saves just at the right time as well, in the right times. And none are more needed than that middle part of the game that I've kind of talked about. Yeah, you're going to really need those checkpoint saves during that particular segment when Leon's back in Raccoon City. And that's all I can really say about that. Like, we'll talk about a few things. There's some things, and obviously stuff I won't talk about because it's too spoilery. But yeah, you know, Leon, that middle part of the game, Leon's comes across a camp, and in that camp there is a special kind of item box, because you don't get to use an item box like Grace or say older Resident Evil titles. in this game, Leon's just got his attaché case, and that's how you store, you know, any items and weapons. But you come across this specific item box that allows you to upgrade your guns and buy a couple new guns. The guns that Leon gets his hands on are 2 different types of handguns, 3 different types of shotguns. One's a major spoiler, which I won't go into. 2 machine guns, I believe, and then 2 sniper rifles. To be honest, you're not going to need much more than those weapons, including the Requiem. And there's no merchant in this. I think maybe some reviews have said that it's all based on this specific item box that you find, and they're littered around like Raccoon City, and it trades points for, you know, upgrades or buying said secondary weapons, the next level weapons basically. And yeah, so when you're roaming around Raccoon City, you can kill zombies and stuff, and it's a callback to when Umbrella would collect bioweapon data. It's a really cool nod to that. It's awesome, and you can then, you know, exchange those for upgrades and charms. We'll speak about the charms in a minute. Yeah, and also new firepower. Charms, right? So the charms in this game are a bit weird. They do give the weapons, you know, increased accuracy, increased fire rate, increased sort of bullet hit, but at the same time it's at the detriment of like using a scope. This is one thing I found, it's the one thing I hated. In order to get a stronger bullet hit on an enemy, almost like being able to headshot zombies and whatever, you know, beasties that you're fighting, you have to unequip like the sniper scope or the red dot sights that you get for your guns, and I just thought that was a bit silly. I didn't really like that. You know, it kind of then has you shooting in third person, whereas this is a weird sort of decision that they made, but I think it was just for accuracy's sake. When Leon does get a red dot sight or an attachment like that, he'll switch to first person. It's automatic, and I don't know, like, it was just a bit jarring because you can, you know, play him in first person and play Grace in first person, and at the same time I just think maybe they should have added like a laser attachment and kept it third person, because it's a bit jarring. It's like, well, you're forcing me to go into first person, even though, you know, I'm playing third person as Leon because I played it how the developers had intended. It's not a big deal, like, you know, it's not something that jarred me too much. It was just a bit weird. And then they kind of force you with a certain charm to then unequip said dot sight and, you know, sniper scope, and then just have it sort of over the shoulder third person, and that was fine. I played it just fine with that, but I just thought, I wish the charm added, you know, increased power, and then not at the detriment of the sniper scope or the red dot sight. But having said that, like, if you upgrade the rifle enough, you're not going to need the sniper scope, to be honest. It's a one shot. You can headshot zombies with a lot of ease. When it comes to the shotgun, you can sort of headshot zombies with a shotgun, but it's slightly different. They're a bit more tanky in this game, so it's never always going to lead to you blowing a zombie's head off. Sometimes that doesn't happen. A bit like the RE2 remake, the RE3 remake, you know. But the rifle is like, you upgrade that enough, that's like the new shotgun. That just takes off a zombie's head. It obliterates their skull and brain mail. So I actually prefer this point system to like the merchants from RE4 and also Village. I prefer it. I think it's better. I like the idea behind it. I like how it's implemented, and I like the fact that it's like collecting bioweapon data and then exchanging it for stuff. I think that's awesome. Like, I really like that idea. So to be honest, and it's controversial, I prefer it to the merchants. Definitely. I like the merchants. I've got a lot of love for the merchants. At the same time, this is like something that's implemented, you know, into the lore as well, and it connects with the lore. That's what this game does. It just connects with everything, and it tries to piece everything together as well as tying everything up. Like, it's brilliant. So I really like that. The reason why I haven't talked about the camp and who like is running the camp and stuff like that, everything behind it, is because it would be a major spoiler, so I'm keeping stum on that. And the zombie types that you fight in Raccoon City, I would say, aren't as good as the ones in the Chronic Care Facility, the ones that we've seen, you know, in the trailers, but they're still cool. They're a bit like the villagers from RE4 Remake, but just like with a zombie skin, but that's kind of underselling it. they're still really cool. They're still like zombies. It's just that's kind of, you know, where I think they went with that. You do get like a zombie with a chainsaw, and he's got like this metal mask on his face, and it reminded me a little bit of like Village and the zombie type things that you fight, or the vampire zombie type things that you fight, like later on in Heisenberg's factory, where they've kind of put like pieces of metal and armor onto themselves, and the same with like the villagers in RE4. It reminded me of that. This zombie's obviously kicked himself out a little bit, but at the same time, it was literally, from what I can tell, only one, and the rest of them, you know, they just like carried pipes or like a knife or a hatchet, and you know, they're trying to swing it at Leon. But they are still just zombies, and they're a little less fresh than the ones in the chronic care facility. So they're not as intelligent. They don't ever speak. The ones in the chronic care facility actually talk and stuff because they're newly infected. But also, I think that Gideon was performing experiments on those particular zombies with the virus that's featured in this game, and that's what led them to be a little bit smarter and more intelligent. With these ones, they're basically Raccoon City zombies, and so they are intelligent, they are smart to an extent, you know, where they retain some things, but they're not as intelligent and smart as the ones from the chronic care facility. And I love that. Again, it's just adding to the lore, you know, and keeping the narrative tightly glued together and not skipping a beat when it comes to sort of zombies added into the narrative of this game. I'm trying to do this without spoiling anything, but yeah, and then later on you get some zombie types, and they were awesome as well. So at first, I would say that the middle part of the game, because we're talking about the zombies, I would say that they're a little bit overused. I will say that some things happen around that part of the game that in my opinion are awesome and call back to like S.D. Perry's standalone, you know, Resident Evil novel Calibian Cove. And from reading that book when I was like 13 years old to now seeing them implement that in a way like Land of the Dead handled it. It's one of my favourite Romero zombie films. It's actually my favourite Romero zombie film. That's controversial in itself. But yeah, it's that same type of thing where they still retain a little bit of that like intelligence from when they were human. And so it leads to, you know, said event taking place. Let's just say, I'm trying not to ruin it. If you've read Calibian Cove, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But yeah, I don't want to ruin it here because it's going to be a surprise, you know, for you guys when you play it. We'll talk about it in the spoiler video that I eventually, you know, make. But yeah, it was awesome, and it did kind of add a little bit of spice to the normal zombie enemies that you were facing off against, even though they're quite a threat basically when they're holding pipes and trying to whack you with them. But yeah, I would say that middle part, for those 4 hours, all you fight is zombies. That's, you know, that's what I will say. I'm trying not to spoil it. What I want to try and say is there's some set piece moments during that part, and then going forward to the later parts of the game, I'd say the third chapter. So you have the first chapter, which is the chronic care facility, the second chapter, which is Raccoon City, or at least the Raccoon City streets, and the third chapter, which is the RPD and redacted. I'm just going to say redacted, like, yeah, there's another location. So during those 4 hours, I was sitting at a 7 out of 10 because there was too many zombies and not enough other creatures. Yeah, I would like to tell you guys this because I don't want you going into it thinking that you're going to suddenly get like X amount of BOWs in the city, you know. It does stay with the zombies. There is a reason for it that I can't get into later on in the game, and it's a juxtaposition of, you know, reanimated corpses using, say, weapons like iron pipes and things like that, compared to, and again, redacted. I'm not going to say what it is, but there's a type of enemy type later on that is a mirror to the zombies that you face on the Raccoon City streets, and so there is a reason as to why you're facing mostly zombies. And also, like, most of the bioweapons are destroyed sort of when the bomb hits. There is a reason as to why the zombies have survived. You will see that when you play the game and you get through the game. But yeah, I would say that most of the bioweapons that were around, just running around Raccoon City, probably just got wiped out basically by the nuke, and somehow the zombies were able to survive. So that's how I looked at it, you know, when I was playing that part. I'd say definitely most of the bigger bioweapons got destroyed, you know, and sort of like any tyrants that were left, they got destroyed. So it was just sort of like the base enemies, like the zombies that were around Raccoon City. They were able to survive in, you know, in some way, and that's where I'm going to end that, because I don't want to, you know, I don't want to talk any more about it because it will spoil it. But yeah, I kind of was sitting at a 7 during that part, because it said 80% left of you know, the game that I had to complete. So I was thinking, well, I know we're going to get to the RPD and then it's going to end, right? Wrong. There was loads more game time, and the way that they handle the third chapter, the last part of the game, is brilliant. Like, there is a lot of fan servicey moments, a lot of set piece moments, and yeah, as I've stated previously, I was very, very happy, very entertained, and as a long time Resident Evil fan, had a smile on my face when I was sort of seeing all this stuff. We can't really go into detail about that because it would just lead to tons and tons of spoilers. But I would say that there's a part that, you know, we've just been talking about and speaking on, where Leon's skills are sort of put to the test, and it's a strange moment for the series. We've had moments like it, but not in the same way. And his skills are put to the test, and it's awesome. But that's the last half of the game. The majority of Leon's gameplay takes place in the Raccoon City streets, so that's why we had to speak on it and talk about it. And plus, I couldn't, you know, do a review without talking about Raccoon City. It looks gorgeous in a very dilapidated, wow, you know, this city got fucked up, like tons of ruins everywhere, but still awe-inspiring, like what they've done with it, you know. And I don't think this is a massive spoiler. You get to see like the Stagler petrol station at one point, which is awesome. I was like, that's so cool. I don't think that's really a big spoiler, you know. I'm not really spoiling too much, but yeah, that was awesome. There's loads of callbacks. There's a callback to Outbreak File 1, if I remember. That's the game that has the underground train station, I think. And then there's a callback to Resident Evil 3 as well, Resident Evil 3 Remake. But overall, yeah, the city looked awesome. It reminded me a little bit of like Half-Life 2, where you're fighting through the city streets and that, and everything just looks reduced to rubble because there's a war taking place, and it's just a massive war zone, and it's kind of like that, but it's the remnants of Raccoon City, you know, what's left. But yeah, the attention to detail when it comes to the city and just everything in this game was top tier, 10 out of 10. And the chronic care facility looked awesome as well. You guys have seen from the trailers. There's so many different rooms. You know, no room's ever the same. There's no reused assets, like when it comes to locations, which, yeah, I was very, very happy with. Graphically, you can tell that I thought this game was incredible. In terms of graphics, you know, it's a 10. It's top tier. It just is so good to look at. There's only one thing I don't like. That's when Grace is collecting blood. If you're, you know, if you're collecting the blood from an enemy, it's kind of a callback to like the older Resident Evil games, where if you shot a zombie, you knew it was fully dead because there'd be a pool of blood. So in this game, Grace can collect, you know, the DNA and the blood samples from the pools of blood. But sometimes if you have like a zombie's body or whatever enemy you've just killed and you go to collect the blood, it clips through the actual body. And I just thought that was the only thing that I didn't like. That's the only kind of weird kind of glitch, I guess. Glitch, or it's not a bug, but it's more of a glitch. It's a clip basically. You clip through the body and you collect the blood. So that took me out of the game a little bit, like a tiny little bit. But other than that, I love the idea behind it, and I thought it was a great callback to the older games, where now when you see a pool of blood, you can actually collect said blood and craft ammo or craft some health, you know, health injectors, things like that. The first aid sprays aren't in this game. Instead, we get health injectors. I'm cool with that. I'm fine with that. We still get green herbs, which is awesome. I don't think we get red, from what I can remember. We don't get any red, blue, you know, or any gold herbs. We just get green. But I was fine with that. And yeah, and you can just mix them together and create like a stronger health injector, or have a medium, you know, or a low level one. So that leads to you going into areas with the low level kind of health injectors and keeping the larger ones for later on. Not that you're ever going to really need those larger ones on standard difficulty. That's what I played this first time round on. But yeah, standard, it was definitely hard in the middle parts of the game. Like that 4-hour section in Raccoon City, that was possibly the hardest. And then kind of, like I said, it pulls an Uncharted and a God of War 2018, and it has these like set piecey moments. But you're still going to need some health for these moments, I will say that. On standard though, I would say it was fairly easy. It was quite easy. So locations wise, let's move on to that. The locations are great. We get the chronic care facility, we get the Renwood Hotel. I should do this in order, shouldn't I? So we get the Renwood Hotel, those city streets where you get to play as Leon for the first time. Then we get the chronic care facility, which is a sizable chunk of game time. And then we go from there to something I don't want to spoil. There's a part I don't want to spoil, but it's actually a callback to, funny enough, Resident Evil Extinction and the end of that film. You'll know what I'm talking about if you've ever seen that film, and how leaving the chronic care facility plays out. How this particular segment plays out. There's also a huge, massive nod to Day of the Dead, to George Romero's Day of the Dead, and that's all I'll say about that. But it was excellent. So yeah, there's loads of influences in this. Like Gideon is literally Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs, and Grace is Clarice. Being that she's an FBI agent, and and then this Buffalo Bill type character is trying to chase and kidnap her. But it goes to show that Nakanishi also honours like the films that started this series, like Day of the Dead, and he does have an understanding of classic zombie films and just horror films in general, much like Mikami did, and that's why I resonate with this director and this particular director that takes on the Resident Evil series. Where sort of Resident Evil 7 was influenced by Chainsaw Massacre, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and also Evil Dead, specifically the Evil Dead remake. This one has got so many kind of nods and references to sort of horror films and older Resident Evil games, and just Resident Evil media in general, so like the CG films, the live action films. But they take these parts and use them really well within this game and within the game story and particular segments. I mean, there's even a nod to Welcome to Raccoon City. There's some things they took from that. The one thing I don't want to reveal because it's too much of a spoiler is taken directly from that film. And then there's another sort of sequence where you've seen it in the trailers. I can spoil this, where zombies are kind of crawling out from under that dining table in the chronic care facility. That's straight out of Welcome to Raccoon City, where the zombies sort of like under the dining table, and Chris is hiding with the lighter, and it sneaks up on him. It's a really good bit actually within the film. But yeah, they take that and they add their little spin on it and kind of repurpose it for the game, and it truly is 30 years of Resident Evil, and they're taking from 30 years of Resident Evil and then implementing them into this game and doing it so well. If we remember, Mikami had a laser room in the original, the OG Resident Evil 4 that Leon has to dodge, and that was taken from the live action Paul Anderson film. So he kind of took that, repurposed it in Resident Evil 4, and it was brilliantly done. I love that part. I was a bit disappointed when it didn't happen in the remake, but instead we got that in separate ways, which was the Ada DLC, which again makes more sense because she's in the red dress, Alice being in the red dress and whatever, avoiding this laser and stuff. It just made more sense. But yeah, so like this is generally like 30 years of Resident Evil all smushed into this game, but done in a really good way and handled very well. And for that, I commend Nakanishi and his team. Like, I sing praise for that. It's not easy to handle something like that and actually make it work and actually kind of thread it into a narrative as well as, a video game and make it work. And he's been able to make it work. Him and his team have been able to make it work. It's not like, there's no moments that are jarring, I would say, to the extent of the giant statue that chases you in the original Resident Evil 4. That bit just took me right out of the game. Like, I hated that bit. I was so glad when they changed that in the remake, because I just always remember thinking to myself, what the fuck is going on? Like, what is this? At least in the remake, it's just like a trap. Do you know what I mean? It's a trap that Salazar's created. So it made a lot more sense than a giant statue just chasing Leon. Like, even thinking back to it now, yeah, it's cool. Like, I've grown to love it over time. But when I first played RE4, I was thinking, what is this? Like, this is actually mental. Like, there's a massive kaiju chasing, Leon. A huge stone statue kaiju chasing Leon. It just was so weird. I'm not going to sit here and say there aren't these sort of like bombastic moments in this game. There are a few, but there is a reason behind them. It makes a lot more sense, definitely. Are they silly? A little bit, yeah, definitely. But nothing that I thought that's just plain weird. Like Village having a character that was straight out of Final Fantasy, basically, which Miranda literally was. Like, she was flying around at one point and using these fireballs to destroy Ethan. It was so fucking weird. Like, it's still weird. The second time or third time I played the game, even though I'm a lot more warmer to Village now, like, yeah, I still thought that was fucking weird and just did not fit, and it was just out of place. This has more Resident Evil 4 moments where the villagers can, fire crossbows at you. Let's just say that, and you go, okay, I kind of get that. It makes sense, right? It has more moments that are like that, with like a zombie still retaining some knowledge from when they were human, being able to then use a weapon against you. Where, yes, it's bombastic, it's silly, like, it's an over-the-top moment, but if you understand the lore behind a zombie and how they work and operate, and the ones in the Resident Evil series, then you're going to be okay with it. That's what I will say. And the particular, say, type of zombie that then uses said weapon, it doesn't seem so weird, because there's some lore, behind that. That's all I can say. I'm trying not to ruin it, but yeah. See, there's so many moments in this game that I end up going down a different path when I'm talking about the whole thing as a whole, because there's so many moments that I need to sort of explain to you and say why this game worked for me. But the next part after that middle segment with Grace, it's only a short segment, but it's really, really good. Then you have Leon trying to defend Grace from a wave of zombies. Well, there's actually two characters. We're not going to touch upon this other character, but yeah, because she's important to the plot, and it would be a spoiler, but he's defending her and said character from a wave of zombies. So that's that part you get to see in the trailers where he's sniping like zombies, and she tries to get into like this church, and eventually she does, and then you control Leon. There's a great moment where he's trying to get to her and this other character, and he lands on a zombie squashing its head, and he says sorry about that, or like coming through, or something like that. It's a really cool one-liner. And then you have a little fight in a graveyard, and then you go to like this church. Then you regain, after there's a kind of a siege battle. This has got a few siege battles in it with Grace and also with Leon, so it's a callback to Resident Evil 4 and RE5's sort of like siege battles. You then go to this underground sort of disposal and prison sort of facility. It reminded me a bit like Toluca Prison in Silent Hill 2 and the Silent Hill 2 remake. It's a bit like that, and it's like, yeah, it's like a waste disposal facility as well as a prison as well. And it's cool because you've got all these zombies in cages. It's a callback to the Resident Evil 2 remake, and you know that eventually when you actually get the power back on, those cells are going to open and the zombies are going to come after you. But this is also where a large portion of a stalker enemy, I will say that, stalks Grace, and you have to play hide and seek with it whilst getting these fuses to bring the power back on. And at points, in order to get rid of this enemy, you have to use individual fuses in individual parts of this underground facility in order to keep this stalker enemy at bay. It's very well done, very well handled. I loved it. It was a great little middle segment just before the Raccoon City sort of segment of the game. And there is also a massive, massive nod and callback to Resident Evil 0 during this, which I was really, like, even from the shot, there's a particular shot that happens, it was just like I remember in Resident Evil 0. It's really cool. So like I said, there's so much kind of influence and callbacks to older games. But it's not done in a way that's like chucking it in your face and then just continuing, like overdoing it. It's just there, it happens, and you go, yeah, I know what that's from, I remember that. But people who, are new to the series, who are just playing this game, they're not going to really know why that a lot of us, will be like excited seeing that particular sort of moment play out, and all the other sort of fan servicey moments that happen. To them, it's not going to register in the same way until maybe they play Resident Evil 0 and then go, oh, that's like that part in Requiem. So it's great the way it handles everything. Like I said, this is why I really like this game. So after that particular part, that segment, there is a massive reveal, I will say that, and I'm not going to say anything else other than that Gideon shows up, and he shows up with another character, and that's all I'll say. And they take Grace to Raccoon City, and that's where Leon, you've seen in the trailers, Leon is driving towards Raccoon City, because Sherry lets him know that Grace is heading to Raccoon City, and so Leon chases after her, to rescue her. Although I will say one thing, there's another tiny little spoiler, she does go willingly. She doesn't get kidnapped like she did in the beginning of the game by Gideon. This time she goes willingly. So you'll know what I'm talking about once you actually play the game. But yeah, and Sherry is in the game. I've covered this anyway. It's pretty obvious it was her. There's no Hunnigan. That's one thing I will say. I don't want to spoil it too heavily, but I'm going to be honest and tell you guys that Ada isn't in this game. She's not in this game. Hunnigan's not in this game. A lot of legacy characters other than Leon and Sherry aren't actually in this game. There's a few surprises, most definitely. Yes. There is, I'd say, one legacy character that does appear. I will say that. And it's a surprise. It was a shock for me. I will say that Alyssa is dead. She is dead. When she gets killed at the Renwood Hotel, that is the end of her. Like, she's gone. And there are no other Outbreak survivors featured in this game. So yeah, I just wanted to tell you guys that because I didn't want you going into this expecting something, and then when it doesn't sort of happen, or a certain character that you wanted to see in this game doesn't appear, then you might look at it and be like, oh, I'm so disappointed. But don't be, honestly. It didn't need these characters to be in there. A lot of people were saying, including myself, that during one of the trailers, someone says, I can't remember what the wording is, but they thought it was Chris Redfield. I'm not too sure if Chris is actually voicing this character, but it's not Chris Redfield. But I do believe that Chris Redfield's voice actor is voicing this particular character. It sounded a lot like him, I will say that. So maybe I'm completely wrong about that, but he's only a bit part character basically. He's a small sort of character. But don't let that deter you from playing this game, because it's got other things in there, that make up for not having legacy characters. I was a bit surprised though that Ada wasn't there. I was surprised, but I kind of like it because it would have got tropey at that point. It would have been like every time Leon, is in a situation, Ada shows up. I know she was supposed to be in Village, but got cut, and I was kind of expecting her to be in this game. Like she would have been repurposed for Requiem, but I'm glad that she didn't show up because it would have been really tropey at that point. I wouldn't have minded, but at the same time, I like that they stuck to their guns and that she wasn't in this. It deals with a different kind of story as well, how it connects to the Resident Evil timeline, and there is kind of room for that to grow, as opposed to just throwing Ada in there and being like, well, she works for this company, and and she's a spy, and then she worked with Wesker at one point. There's sort of none of that sort of stuff in it, and it allows the narrative in this game to kind of breathe and do what it does, So I just think that throwing in these legacy characters and just throwing them in there wouldn't have worked. It would have just become bloated and just, it wouldn't have worked. That's how I feel about it. Some people might feel a different way, but that's my personal take on it. So then Leon, he gets to Raccoon City. We've kind of covered that when we're talking about gameplay, because we had to, because that's a big sizable chunk of Leon gameplay, and there's no Grace during this particular part. And then it moves to the RPD. There's not much I can say about that because that's a massive spoiler. I'm not going to spoil nothing about that. It then moves to another location, which I was surprised and shocked at that we were getting, and it's a classic location. Some of you might have figured it out and worked it out, and might have guessed, but yeah, that was awesome. And we get like a flashback sequence. There's a few flashback sequences during this particular sort of part. It's the beginning parts of like the third chapter, and there's loads of like set piece moments, loads of callbacks to the Resident Evil 2 remake and RE3 remake. What I will say is there's an awesome boss battle that takes place just before you get to this location, it was really good. And I'm not going to say anything about it because I don't want it to be spoiled. But yeah, the final kind of half of the game and the locations and stuff leading up to the very, very end location reminded me a lot of Evil Within, the ending to that game. So if you can kind of picture that in your mind, if you've played the Evil Within, it's very similar. Like in Requiem, how kind of you get from one place to another, and it's the end sort of segment of that game. It just reminded me a lot of Evil Within, and was obviously inspired by that game. There's also some inspiration, from Parasite Eve 2, which is one of my favourite survival horror games on the original PlayStation. And yeah, there was some stuff that was taken from that was influenced for Requiem's final location, and I absolutely love that because Parasite Eve 2 is one of those games that's been forgotten over time, and it wasn't super successful when it came out. It's quite a niche sort of game, but I absolutely love it. It's up there with some of the best survival horror games, that existed on the PlayStation. And I can tell that Nakanishi and people on his team, they're fans of that game, and they love that game as much as I do. It was pretty much OG Resident Evil 2 meets Final Fantasy, and it was a great kind of melding of two sort of genres. And I think Squaresoft smashed it, and it's the same with Requiem. They borrow so heavily from so many different survival horror games and just horror like media, and then they expertly sew it into this game. That's my opinion on everything. They sew it so neatly into this game that when things happen like that, I go, oh, that's from Parasite Eve 2, or that's from Resident Evil 0, or that's from Day of the Dead. It's so well handled and so well done. One of the reasons why I had to sort of talk about the story to start with is it plays such a huge role in this game. It's not like Resident Evil 4 where it's just a tale of Leon rescuing the president's daughter and stopping this doomsday cult. This is a lot more, or Umbrella's up to no good again, which yeah, they are in this game, but there's more to it. But in the older Resident Evils, it was okay, Umbrella's got this base, a leak's happened, now we've got to stop the leak from getting out. That was pretty much a lot of what built up older Resident Evil titles. And then after Resident Evil 4, we moved the plot forward a little bit. I always say that RE5's plot interested me more than RE4's plot, but with this particular game's plot, it's so intricate, there's so many plot twists, there's so much diversion and stuff that really does make you go, wow, that was clever, that was really cool, that I had to talk about the plot, because also the set pieces are interwoven with this plot, so I can't spoil a lot of it. I can't talk about these set pieces because it would spoil the plot, and in tandem, spoil the rest of the game, and I don't want to do that. So that's why we got the plot out of the way. In terms of gameplay and mechanics, the stalker enemy sort of segments of the game, characters returning, all that stuff I think I've covered throughout this review. We've covered Leon's sort of gameplay segments, we've covered Grace's, we covered the stalker enemies, the bosses as much as I could cover it, the fan servicey stuff, the fact the game does have a lot of set pieces that are, sort of in a similar vein to Uncharted or God of War, The Last of Us. We've covered a lot, right? Graphics, I've said, yeah, it's a gorgeous game. The locations are amazing. Now, I could only cover, I'd say, 2 of the locations because the rest would be spoilers, definitely. And even that middle segment after Grace escapes the chronic care facility, that's a massive spoiler. The actual sort of location that she gets to and kind of what it reveals is a massive spoiler. The last half of the game, the 3rd chapter, sort of the RPD and then onwards, they're massive spoilers. So I think I've done well in spoiling a few little things and then leaving everything else sort of open for you to experience and for you to see. I think I've done a good job at that. I don't know what else there is to talk about. I guess sound and just the music in the game. The sound design is impeccable. It's brilliant. 10 out of 10, but we've come to expect that from these newer, Resident Evil titles. Even the older ones were class. They were incredible as well. Music-wise, this has like a really cyberpunky, synthwave, sci-fi, gritty soundtrack, and a lot of people are complaining there's not a lot of, backing tracks sort of during the game. I don't know where you're coming from. I think it has loads. It has its own sound. It's unique to this game. There is a remix of that classic main hall Resident Evil 2 theme that's remixed in this, and it plays, it kind of loops, and it's incredible. It never got boring for me. I loved hearing it. I mean, if you're a long-time fan, you're going to love it. I guess if you're like a newbie to the series, maybe you'll find it gets a bit repetitive. I didn't think it did. A lot of the sort of the backing tracks that play during the cutscenes and epic moments, really good. There's like some kind of audio stings, some horror audio stings that are used really well. Overall, I'd say it's a 9 out of 10 for the soundtrack. It was really good, so I don't get the negative comments when it comes to the soundtrack. I think it's awesome. In terms of sound effects, being able to hear footsteps that are in the same sort of vicinity as you, and being able to tell where they're coming from, you know, knowing that like a zombie's in the next room because they're moaning or they're talking to themselves. I mean, we've got like zombies in this that literally, you know, are going mental and just shouting things like "kill him, kill him, kill him!" Like, it's so cool. I'd say like the singing zombie, one of the kind of the zombies that aggro the other zombies. She just like sings these really sort of depressing, woeful tones. And it's just, yeah, the sound design is incredible. You're going to be very impressed with it. To me, all the guns sounded fine. You know, the pops, the cracks, reloading them. I actually forgot to mention that there's really cool animations with Leon and Grace as well. If you press reload and you've already reloaded the gun, like Grace will pull the slide back and you'll see the bullet in there, and she checks it. And Leon does the same thing with the handgun. But then also when he's loading the shotgun, he'll load it in this really cool way. It's like a violin sort of style. There's stuff like that, you know, with the machine guns. He'll check the clip, put it back in, and yeah, I just thought all that stuff was awesome. And the sound effects for that, you know, are on point, top tier. So yeah, not much else really to say other than sound effects and the music. The actual score for the game is a 10 out of 10. Like I said previously, it's brilliant. I will say that when the music ramps up during those cinematic moments, it just makes such a big difference. And even though we've had some great sort of scores for a lot of the Resident Evil games, harkening back to the old school ones, they've always had their own sort of flavour, their own sort of style, which is great. But for this, it's like a big budget movie type of thing. It's like an Inception type of score, and it's just used brilliantly and perfectly, and it's got me actually wanting to download the music, like to go and buy the album, because I like it so much. You know, you have your normal kind of just operatic type of like scores, you know, I'd say more for kind of the theme and the atmosphere, and then you've got like your really cool synth-wavy type tracks mixed in there as well. So when you've got those really cool, amazing moments, those really explosive moments, the music just accompanies it, and the synergy between the two is spot on. It really is. So I was a massive fan of the soundtrack. I think the older games had some great soundtracks. You know, there's some classic tracks, some classic scores, but I think this one won me over. I think it's probably my favourite score next to the original Resident Evil 2. And also the original Code Veronica soundtrack as well. That's a personal favourite. I think these might be my top 3. And I think this might be number 1. I think it's this. I think it's Requiem soundtrack, then Resident Evil 2, the OG, and then I reckon Code Veronica after that. They're my 3 favourite scores within the series. But yeah, just amazing. And there's some real heart-pounding, you know, pumping kind of tracks that play, and yeah, that's all I can say. It's great. Like I said, there's a great synergy between the cinematic sort of experience you get from this game and the music just adding to that. Perfect score. So I think that's all I can cover really. You know, otherwise we'd get into spoiler territory. I think I've covered everything. I think I've gone through everything. My time with the game was just, it was great. The middle part of the game, because I didn't know that it was going to continue and there was more game left, it kind of started to get me a little bit depressed. I was thinking, is this it? Is this all there is? But then it surprised me, you know, with the third act. It really did surprise me. The only reason I'd say that the game misses points and is short of a 9 are some of the reasons that I've covered in this video. You know, it is I think the overuse of zombies, and that led to kind of no real new kind of bioweapons being shown off during that middle part of that second act. I would say that while the story is incredible and I really did like it, there are some moments where it falters a little bit. You know, I think that's why I gave it like the score that I did, because there are a few tiny little moments where it falters, and then there are points where it moves quite briskly and you have to keep up with it. And that's why a lot of people are saying, you know, if you're familiar with the series and you're a fan, you're going to understand this game better. If you're a newcomer and you just jump into this, I think you might be a little bit confused. So, I mean, it's a double-edged sword at the end of the day. For the rest of us, we're extremely happy with it, or at least the majority of us are. But for newcomers, I'm hoping that it opens the doors for them to go and then find the other games in the series and also the older titles as well. There are very little and very few missteps, but it does misstep a few times. I think that there's some parts where it could be looked at as quite cheesy and a bit silly, but I think with newer Resident Evil titles, we're kind of used to a little bit of cheese at this point. I mean, the series started out with one of the worst, scripts in terms of dialogue that I had ever heard, and that a lot of gamers have ever heard, and it's kind of continued that tradition. Here and there, even with the latest remakes, there's still really silly moments, like Leon backflipping off a wall before the Bella sisters burst through the wall. It's like, did you really have to do that? But I love it for that. That's why I love Resident Evil, because it is a little bit sort of grindhousey and silly, and it does wear that on its sleeve. It wears it on its sleeve. I think other than the remake of the first game, most of the games are pretty schlocky. And they always kind of have had a bit of that schlock to them, and I'm all for a bit of schlock. I like that in my horror games and my horror films. So yeah, like I said, it's hard to find faults, but I'm trying to explain why this gets like an 8.7 out of 10. It just falls short of a 9. So it is that middle act where I just wanted a little bit more from that. The story is great overall, but there are a few little missteps, tiny little missteps. Obviously we can't talk about them, otherwise I'd spoil it. The fan service stuff, there are points where it's blatant. I think for die-hard fans of Resident Evil, it really didn't, that sort of didn't feel out of place. It was fine. If you've watched the CG films, and I don't know, read the books and seen some of the films, that sort of stuff happens, right? It just happens. You'll know what I mean when you play the game, or if you've watched any YouTube videos where someone's played it and you're waiting to get it, and you didn't mind being spoiled, then you'll know exactly what I mean. But yeah, the fan service is fine. It's just proper in your face. So I don't know if that's a mark that gets taken away for that. It's just that I can see with some long time fans and newcomers, it might feel a bit weird and a bit strange. But yeah, I think going into this game, the fact that it concentrates quite heavily on the zombies as the main bioweapons, within this game, I think you should go into it with the same mindset that you had when playing a game like Last of Us or the Metal Gear Solid series, where you're fighting sort of just soldiers and things like that. If you go into it with that mindset, it won't feel so weird and so jarring when zombies make up pretty much 85% of the enemies in the game. If you go into it with that mindset, you'll be fine. And also, there are different types of zombies. That's the other thing that's really cool. So, if you go into it with that mindset, because it still offers a lot more than, say, something like The Last of Us, or, I don't know, Metal Gear Solid, in terms of just your everyday variety of enemies that you have to sort of face moment to moment. That's not to say you don't get other bioweapons in the game, because you do, but like I said, that would be a spoiler. We're not going to get into that. But yeah, you do get other bioweapons, but they're handled a little bit differently, I will say that, than your normal kind of Resident Evil game. Kind of, I'd say they're handled differently. It's hard to explain without spoiling it, but yeah, you still get them. It's just their epic moments. Let's just say that their epic moments when you face off against them. I think while the kind of dual protagonist sort of thing is handled really well, and I enjoyed all of it, I think that it's gonna split some people. They're gonna prefer Grace, the more survival horror style with the stalker enemies and sort of the more stealthy gameplay, and then other people might prefer getting to Leon's parts, because at first you only have a short sort of period of time with him. It's those parts that you've seen during the trailers, but then, like I said, the second act you're playing just as Leon. So it can be to some people depending on what they prefer. I like both, but some people might prefer Grace's parts more than Leon's, and other people might just want to get straight to like Act 2 and play as Leon, you know. Obviously Leon is much more action orientated, but it's handled well, you know, and it's not Resident Evil 6 levels of action, or even RE5 and 4 levels of action. There are some parts like that, definitely. I'd say it's, you know, a little bit on par with those games, but at the same time I think it handles it better. You know, the situations Leon finds himself in are handled better, in my personal opinion. Some people might not actually see a difference. They might just think, yeah, this is pretty much Resident Evil Village, you know, but with Leon. But honestly, there are a lot of different details, and I think it's handled better. You'll see what I mean when you play the game. But I liked the action segments of the game as well, because they were handled so well. And I also like Grace's more stealthy, cunning sort of style of gameplay, you know, and the fact that she was underpowered. She wasn't just grabbing an Uzi from somewhere and mowing zombies down. I think that they handled both those gameplay styles perfectly, and it really did kind of keep the game fresh and new every time I was either playing as Grace or playing as Leon. You know, with Grace, it's slow, methodical, sneaking past zombies. Then with Leon, it's dispatching them with ease, and it kind of like, it slows down and then it ramps up. It slows down and it ramps up, and you'd think that'd get annoying, but it doesn't. Like, you know, Nakanishi and his team handled it perfectly. I never had no issues with the different styles of gameplay. I thought they were implemented brilliantly. So if it was just based on that, this would be like a 10 out of 10, right? But like I've stated previously, there's some people that aren't going to vibe with that, like I did, or a lot of other people did, because some fans, they absolutely hate Resident Evil 4, and they hate the remake of 4. That's the truth. I know that game has tons and tons and tons of fans, including myself, but there are a lot of people out there, a lot of fans that don't like that, you know, whereas they prefer more the Grace style of gameplay, and vice versa. Some people just want the action horror style of gameplay, so they're more on Team Leon's, you know, on the side of Leon, more on Team Leon. So, you know, I personally think they handled it brilliantly, and I liked both styles. While the script and the dialogue is really good, it might be some of the best that I've kind of heard, and the acting is really good, from the, you know, the motion capture actors as well as the voice actors. I will say one thing, that it does have some slips, definitely. There are some moments that sound a bit weird, like some of the characters sound a little bit sort of cheesy with their line deliveries. You know, Leon's quipping all the time. Obviously, I'd say 3 out of, I don't know, like the 100 quips that he sends out there, I'd say that 3 maybe just fell flat. So that's not bad, really. 3 out of 100, you know, because he's quipping quite a bit, but not to the point where it's annoying or irritating. And Grace, I guess, she's really good. Her acting is phenomenal, as is Gideon's and the other, you know, the other characters in the game. I can't spoil them, but yeah, I think the acting's really, really good in the game. The motion capture is brilliant, and the voice acting is great. But there are parts where Grace is constantly panting and fearful, and I think they overdid it a little bit. You know, they kind of overused that. I get where they were going with it, and it's fine, you know, every now and then. But I think you kind of start to notice when it's happening like all the time, you know. So they could have just, I don't know, just held back a little bit when it comes to, you know, her being fearful and whatnot. But having said that, like I said, it doesn't break the game in any way. It's a small little nitpick. Most of these are nitpicks, and they kind of all add up to why this game is getting an 8.7 from me out of 10. It's just short of of a 9. I think that maybe it's my favourite after the Resident Evil 2 remake. Definitely, I might like it a little bit more than Resident Evil 7. Definitely like it more than Village, and I definitely like it more than the remake of 3. One thing I will say is it's got a ton of jump scares, and it does have some creepy moments, but I was never really scared. I think the only time I've been scared with a recent sort of Resident Evil title was 7 in the basement. That was a part that really did kind of get to me and and freak me out a little bit. But when it comes to sort of this game versus like the Silent Hill 2 remake, I was pretty much freaked out the whole time I was playing the Silent Hill 2 remake. They got the atmosphere and the creepiness and the scariness of Silent Hill 2, the original, and just translated it, for a newer generation. And there was a lot of times that I was jump scared, or I just felt uneasy and uncomfortable playing Silent Hill 2. This game, you won't be feeling like that, but then Resident Evil's never supposed to be like that. It's never supposed to be that scary. It's like it's always had a little bit of action in there, and it's always had a little bit of just hokiness and schlockiness and a tiny bit of grindhouse. It's always been like that type of horror experience, where you don't feel completely helpless. It's not like Alien Isolation where you feel completely helpless. In a Resident Evil game, you've always been able to get your hands on some guns to protect yourself. You're never completely helpless. But I think maybe after 7, this was definitely the scariest one. It had the most jump scares, definitely, and they really were efficient jump scares. They made me jump a few times. Even the one with Chunk, that big sort of like fat zombie thing, right? I saw that in the trailers. This isn't a spoiler, but I saw it in the trailers where he kind of comes around a corner and jump scares Grace, and that still happened, and I still shit myself. It still made me jump. So it's got some really sort of tense and creepy moments. I would say it's more of a tense experience, definitely, than anything. And we've had that previously with like the original Resident Evil Nemesis and Resident Evil 2 remake and the Resident Evil remake and all the older games. So yeah, it's still got like that tension, and this is definitely maybe one of the tensest. Definitely, the atmosphere's spot on, and it's still a more darker game than Village. It's definitely got a more darker slant to it than Village, which was I never really felt like that was very foreboding. And even though it's got its own atmosphere, it was straight up action horror, much like Resident Evil 5 or RE4 remake. This is more in line with like a bit of 7 mixed with a bit of 4, but I would say a lot more horror than 4, and it's maybe on par with the Resident Evil 4 remake in terms of like Leon's segments and some parts in the game. So yeah, that doesn't really knock points off, because I think Resident Evil's always followed this template, and this game's just following the same template, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But yeah, that doesn't really knock points off, to be honest with you, but it's not very scary. There we go. So that's kind of my reasoning behind giving it an 8 out of 10, or to be specific, an 8.7 out of 10. That is the score. That's my final score, and that is the one that I'm sticking with. It's a fantastic game. I really suggest that anybody who's been with this series for a long time, don't listen to the naysayers, don't listen to the people kind of like just hating on it. I think for the sake of hating on it, experience it for yourself, because I think you're going to enjoy it. I really do. I think a lot of people that come to my channel and know me as a content creator are going to enjoy it in the same way that I have. I don't think anything's ever perfect, okay? So this game isn't perfect, right? If I had to pick the 2 perfect games, it would be the original Resident Evil 2 and the remake of Resident Evil. Even those aren't perfect, but they're close to it. In terms of experiences, I think those 2 hit the mark the best for me when it comes to something that's like a big, massive Resident Evil package. Those 2 always hit the mark for me. They're absolute classics, and I've played them countless times. So I don't think anything after those, for me personally, is ever going to top that. But this gets very, very close. I will say that this gets really, really close. I don't like it as much as the Resident Evil 2 remake, just because it's a remake, of a classic, and it's got those old school Resident Evil vibes. But I think it comes very, very close, definitely. If RE2 remake is a 9 on my scale, and the RE4 remake is a 9, just because I think it did a lot better than the original, I would say that this being an 8.7, close to a 9, that's pretty good. Do you know what I mean? That is pretty good. Maybe over time and with more playthroughs, I'll bump it up. Who knows? It just depends, innit? I think one of the biggest things, I think, or not. Yeah, it's definitely one of the biggest things, along with like Act 2 and the stuff that I've already said, is if you do replay it, you do have to go through the whole investigating the Wrenwood Hotel section of the game. And to me, it's a great moment. It should never be, discarded or anything on multiple playthroughs. But at the same time, it's very slow paced. But that's part of the course, unfortunately. That's par for the course when it comes to, current gen single player cinematic games. There are moments in various games where your character will be walking, or they'll be given exposition, and it's just a way to, continue the story without breaking into a cutscene or, taking like control away from the player. And there's a few moments like that in this game, but to be honest, because the beginning is so well done, it doesn't feel like a chore, to go through. But I think with just multiple playthroughs, it can lead to people just being like, I just want to skip this part, But I take like Resident Evil 7's beginning and put it up against this, and I think that RE7's falls short. That's the thing with that game, it falls short, because that, to me, RE7's like a straight 8 out of 10, and this is an 8.7 because I like it more and it does things better and it's more Resident Evil feeling. With 7, that whole beginning part, that is a chore to get through. Now, this is me personally, how I feel. Other people might not feel like that, but with Requiem, with the beginning and stuff, it doesn't feel like that. Like, to me, Requiem just feels like it's a better opening, even though it's sort of similar and takes as long to get to the to get things moving. I would say that's a slight drawback. It is on multiple playthroughs, I think it could get annoying, so that's why I think it's something for some players that might be a drawback. Like I said, these are nitpicks. They might sound like things that really detract from the game, but they're nitpicks. Like, they really actually didn't bother me. I think the main thing, the only thing, right, that really is knocking points off of it, really realistically for me, even though I absolutely love Act 2, is the lack of enemy variety during that act. And I think, just in general, like I said, 85% of this game is zombies. And I think Act 1 set up some really kind of unique ideas to do with the zombies, and then Act 2, you just get like normal zombies. So make of that what you will, but like I said, 85% of this game consists of zombies being the main threats. And so I think that's what knocked those few points off of my overall score. Also, I literally just remembered that it doesn't feature any mercenaries mode, and I think that also adds to the game losing a few points as well. But it does have bonus content, and it doesn't have, like, another thing I didn't mention, it doesn't have stupid like side missions and stuff in this game, unlike the Resident Evil 4 remake had, which I enjoyed that in the RE4 remake, but this game didn't need that. It is meant to be replayed from the beginning to end, so you can grab some points and then go and buy like all the bonus content. It's still got that stuff in it, much like the RE2 remake, the RE3 remake, RE4 remake, and so this is no different, and it makes me want to replay the game after a bit of time. I'm going to give it a little bit of space and then go back to it, and that's only because I've been playing like Dead Space remake, Silent Hill 2 remake, I've replayed Village, so I need a bit of time, like, away from your over-the-shoulder third-person or just action horror style horror games. I just need a break from that. I mean, at the moment I'm playing some Just Cause 3, going to try and finish that game because I've never actually finished it. So yeah, it's like it's a personal thing where I need a bit of space. But when I do go back to it, I know I'm gonna fall in love with it even more than my first playthrough. So who knows? Maybe it might bump up to a 9. It's a very divisive game, definitely, I think, for fans. But it resonated with me, and I thought it was brilliant. So I can easily recommend this game. For anybody wanting to see what the series is about. I know it's not really an entry level sort of game to go into, but at the same time it's tons of fun and it's exciting, and yeah, it's got like that Uncharted, like I said, Last of Us, God of War 2018 vibe about it, and it's just, yeah, it's brilliant. Like, the set piece moments are standouts, the story is great, kept me guessing every step of the way. The music was phenomenal, like I said. Voice acting, mocap, top tier. Action, top tier. Horror, top tier. Bosses, great. The zombie enemies that you do get, yeah, they were sick. So yeah, it's just it's an all-round package. I really love my time with this game, and I think it encompassed 30 years of Resident Evil perfectly. Like, I couldn't have asked for anything better to celebrate this series. I think they did well with this. So if this review has swayed you, I suggest you go out and buy it, or when you get some money, go out and buy it. If you've already played it and you know kind of all the spoilers and stuff that other people ain't privy to, then just keep it to yourself for now. I'm gonna make a spoilers video and just cover the story. It would be like, yeah, mostly I'll just cover the story and all the spoilers. So that I'll make that sometime down the line when people have at least got through the game. Maybe in a couple of weeks' time. I definitely feel like the series is back on track after being disappointed with Village. I did eventually come round to it. It was a little bit like the original Resident Evil 4. I started to appreciate it for what it was. But yeah, the RE3 remake was a disappointment as well, so I feel like we're back on track with this game. I think it definitely got Resident Evil back on track. Even though the remake of 4, personally, I actually prefer it over the original, but I still class them as both being 9s, Resident Evil 4, I think, is a 9 because it was just amazing, like, for the time, when it came out, and it changed the landscape of gaming, basically. Like, now we have so many games that have the over-the-shoulder third-person, camera perspective. So yeah, that will always be a 9, just because it was a game changer. But I think the remake, for me personally, is better. I just prefer it better. I think it does atmosphere better, and sort of all the kind of stuff that that kind of was super cheesy and OTT. I think with the original RE4 remake kind of scales it back, and I think it just did a better job. But hey, it had a great template to build upon. So again, in terms of a game that's just sort of come out from Nakanishi, I think that he's done a great job at this, and his team done a great job at this. It's a Resident Evil game that isn't a remake. It isn't based on anything. It's a brand new RE game, and I think that it's a very good one. So anyway, that's enough from me. I've been rambling too much. I will keep you updated on any other Resident Evil news that comes out. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the review. Give me a like. Get in the comments. Don't spoil anything though. And until next time, I'm System Check 66, and I'm out of here. Hasta luego.